Today on Ancient DOS Games, we're doing Cybersphere, which is another independently made game that, even though it's a Breakout clone, it actually does everything pretty well, especially for an independently made Breakout clone. So rather than just jump around everything, let's just cut straight to the game stats. Cybersphere was released by Cycon Software in 1996 and is a one-player Breakout clone. It uses 320 by 200 by 256 color VGA graphics. Its sound support is a little interesting because it can take advantage of the OPL3 chip on any sound card that happens to have one. That would mostly include Sound Blaster cards after the second version of the Sound Blaster Pro, so it's kind of interesting in that respect, since it's not actually using digitized sound, but rather synthesized sound. So, setting it up in DOSBox can also be a little tricky, but we'll get to that. And then as for its release date, it's been made freeware thanks to Clay Hellman, the game's author. As for where to get it though, I'm not 100% sure. I've found a few places online, and I'll post some links on my website, but it's kind of difficult to get this game nowadays. But if you do enough searching, you'll find a copy. Another neat aspect about this game is that it was actually written in assembly language, which means the file size is extremely small. This entire game fits in a mere 345 kilobytes, and that's very little space when you consider this video for it is probably more like 100 megabytes. Should be something like 100,000 kilobytes. So yeah, it's interesting when you see a game that fits in such a small space and yet packs such a lot of stuff to do. And I also want to quickly note that the actual gameplay is a lot smoother than you're seeing on the screen, since it actually plays at 70 frames a second, and this video is only recorded at 30 frames a second, so yeah, it actually plays a lot smoother than you're seeing. So any of you familiar with Breakout probably understands the premise already. All you got are a whole bunch of bricks to destroy, and you have a paddle to do it with, and the paddle simply hits a ball to bounce it into the bricks. It's a really simple concept, and it started with the game Breakout, which is why a lot of these games are referred to as Breakout clones. But this particular one has some interesting parts. Like, for example, the gameplay is really smooth, and you have very fluent control over where the ball goes. The paddle at the bottom, the way it works is if the ball hits the very middle of the paddle, it will always bounce back up directly upwards. And then the closer you get to the edges, the more of an angle you get on the ball. So you actually have extremely good control over where the ball goes in this game, which is something not a lot of independently made Breakout clones can do, and in fact, even some of the commercially made ones fail to achieve this. When you actually begin the game, you have a choice between 5 different sectors you can visit. Though actually, 2 of them are locked, so there's only 3 of them you can actually visit at first. And the way it works is that each sector generally has a sort of, you'd think they'd have some sort of theme going about them, but really it's more so just the way the blocks are, and maybe some of the ways that the levels are laid out. I'm not sure. In fact, the difficulty is just all over the place. The first level in the game is pretty easy, and the second level is pretty easy, and the third level is sadistic. And then, okay, it's not sadistic, but it's not easy. And then the fourth level just gets even harder. And then suddenly there's a drawback in difficulty when you get to the 5th level. So yeah, the difficulty's all over the place. So the sectors are more in line to limit the number of extra lives you get. And I'll get into that as we talk about the power-ups now. See, there's actually 12 different power-ups you can collect in this game, and they all have symbols on them to let you know what kind of power-up they are. And one of them is actually bad to get, and that's the exclamation mark, because the exclamation mark makes you lose half of your gems. Though it's actually still worth 100 points to pick up the power-up, so if you only have 2 gems, and since each gem is only worth 50 points when you beat the level, then you might actually get the gem loss power-up anyways, because you get more points that way. Barely. But the other power-ups include a hold power-up, which lets you catch the ball on your paddle, a width power-up to make your paddle wider, a fire power-up, which allows you to actually shoot the bricks, which is, the best kind of power-up in a Breakout clone, a slow power-up to slow the ball down, which is really important because the ball can get going really darn fast in this game, ball power-up, which actually puts another ball onto the playing field, and you can have 6 balls out there, and it can get pretty hectic. There's a guard power-up, which creates a guard field at the bottom for a brief amount of time so that you can't lose any balls for that time. When you actually have a guard power-up, that's when you can really do the most damage to the field, because then if you have a fire power-up as well and several balls going, you can just blast away and not worry about what's going on. The extra life power-up is an interesting one because there's only 1 extra life power-up per sector. So if you spot it, it's got the L shape on it, if you spot it, make sure you pick it up because you don't want to miss them. They are very hard to come by, and you only get one per sector. Then you have the plus power-up, and the plus power-up basically sends you to a bonus level. And you're going to be seeing these bonus levels a lot. There's 10 different bonus levels, and you pick up the plus power-up and you go to the bonus level. And if you're actually in a bonus level and you pick up a plus power-up while you're in the bonus level, it sends you out of the bonus level. But you get an extra 2,500 points for it anyways, whereas if you just die in the bonus level, you don't get those extra points. And then there's a question mark power-up. And the question mark power-up you gotta be really careful about, because it can randomly be any of the other power-ups. Oh yeah, there's also, I keep forgetting about these two. There's a gem power-up, which actually gives you 10 gems, and then there's a blank power-up. It does absolutely nothing, as you might expect. And yeah, the question mark can be any of those, so that's basically what you end up with. There are some other notes I have about the power-ups too, specifically in the way they work. Now, in a lot of Breakout clones, there's generally a certain way that the power-ups work, like either you pick up a power-up and you keep it until you die, or you pick up a power-up and it only lasts for a certain length of time, or you can only use it a certain number of times. In this game, it's a little interesting. The hold, width, and fire power-ups, all three of those, you can pick them up and you'll keep them forever, or at least until you die or beat the level. But the other thing too is that if you pick them up again when you already have them, you lose them. So if you already have a wide paddle and you pick up a width power-up, you become a short paddle again. If you already have the ability to fire shots and you pick up a fire power-up, you lose the ability to fire shots. So it makes it interesting how once you have these power-ups, they now become power-ups you want to dodge. So it adds an extra layer of gameplay that you wouldn't really expect from that kind of a feature. And speaking of features, this game actually has some interesting ones in the way the boards are laid out. Like, I mean, you have these blocks that you can hit that actually become a lot of smaller blocks when you destroy them. And then there's also these areas at the sides of the screen where if you go off one side, you come back on the other. There's diagonal walls. Like, I mean, diagonal walls are really uncommon for a game like this. Well, a game like this at this day and age. And then there's also these armored blocks, and I really hate these things. They're basically these blocks that have like this armor shield on the front of them, so you can only hit them from the back. It's, I don't know, you might as well just put immune blocks there. Oh, and the invisible blocks. I really hate the invisible blocks in this game. The invisible blocks in this game are very common, and if you see a playing field that it seems like there's areas where there could be blocks but there aren't blocks, chances are there's blocks there. They're just invisible. And you're going to find that that's really going to haunt you in some of these levels, especially in the later sectors. Not so much in the first sector, but in the second and third sector, the invisible blocks can be really annoying. So just be prepared for that. Other than that, though, there's not really much wrong with this game. I suppose I should probably mention a couple tips, though, just for people who are going to be playing this game. For one thing, there's a little scenario that can end up happening sometimes where if there's walls really close to the bottom of the playing field at the edges of the screen and your ball gets trapped between that wall and your paddle, it may seem like it's impossible to get it out of there, but here's how you actually get out of that situation if it does happen, is just very slightly move the paddle away from the edge so that the ball is still hitting the paddle, but there's not a big enough gap for it to fall under, and that way you're more likely to get the ball to hit the paddle at the right angle to get it to get out of that little crevice and then back into the playing field. Also, don't feel compelled to pick up the gems when you see them. Like, I mean, I know they're shiny and they're worth points when you end the level, but that's just it. They aren't worth any points until you beat the level, which means picking up the gems when you have like a ball that you gotta be worrying about can really lead you to disaster. So avoid the gems if you really need to keep an eye on the ball, and just go for the gems if it's safe to go for them. And my last tip is in regards to the power-ups, specifically with the question mark power-up. Now, the question mark power-up can actually do more harm than good. If you already have a hold and width and fire and you pick up a question mark, there's a 1 in 4 chance that you're gonna lose one of those. So only pick up the question mark really if you don't have any of those and you want to get one, because then there's no risk of losing any of those power-ups that you already have. Oh yeah, and you can change difficulty levels, and changing the difficulty level just makes it so that the ball goes slower overall or faster overall. And different high score tables are kept for each difficulty level as well, so you don't have to worry about normal level scores overwriting easy scores or something like that. Or actually, it would be more so easy scores overwriting hard scores you'd want to worry about. Yeah. So now let's talk about how to get this game working in DOSBox, because this can be a little tricky. Like, I mean, okay, the game does work fine if you set the cycles count to maximum. There's just one problem, it's the sound. The sound in this game, the way it's done, can get really stuttery if the cycles count is not set absolutely perfectly. So getting the right mix of sound quality and gameplay can be really challenging with this game using DOSBox. Now what I do is I set a fixed cycles count, and I set it pretty high. Like, I mean, this setting I'm using is 50,000, and that might work for any of you on a higher end system. If you're on a lower end system, you might just want to set it to max and just hope for the best. And you also got to make sure that you set the CPU core to dynamic mode for this game. Normally the auto setting for the CPU core works for pretty much every game, but I think because this game was written in assembler, it's missing some of those qualities that normally trigger the auto setting, so you gotta manually set it to dynamic mode. Otherwise your sound stuttering is going to be even worse. There's also a few changes to the sound settings you need to make. Specifically, you want to set the OPL mode to OPL 3, though I think the auto setting will actually pick up that it needs to be on OPL 3 mode, but I just set it just in case. And also you need to make sure you set the OPL emulation mode to compatible. And there's actually some short forms here. It's OPL emu and compat. So, and don't forget to actually change both the OPL rate and the mixer rate if you want to raise the sound quality, specifically with the frequency. Oh, and one last thing, if you use the graphics filters in this game, you'll make it look a lot better. It has all those regular corners and edges and stuff that look really smooth and really good when you use the graphics filters. Again, my favorites are the HQ, but, pick whichever one you like the best. And with that said, this episode of Ancient DOS Games is concluded. Stay tuned for episode 7, and, what should the hint be? Actually, for the next episode, all I really gotta say is 4 words. Good luck, Material Defender.